Okay, let's jump right in. We're going to deep dive today into, well, what one paper pretty much calls an ecological nightmare, trying to manage invasive crayfish.
Yeah, it's a really important area. The paper we're focusing on is Managing Invasive Crayfish, Is There a Hope? Led by Francesca Gherardi and her team.
And our mission really is to walk you through what they found. They've synthesized global efforts to control these non-indigenous crayfish species, NICS as they call them.
Exactly. We'll look at the methods people are using, where things go wrong, what might work in the future, so you get the whole picture, the sort of the state of play.
And it's definitely a battleground. For anyone listening who maybe doesn't quite grasp the scale, why are these little crustaceans such a big deal?
Well, the thing is, when these NICS invade, they often become what scientists call keystone consumers. And they're also bioturbators, meaning they physically churn up the environment.
So they're not just eating things, they're actively changing the whole underwater landscape.
Pretty much. They restructure entire aquatic ecosystems. It causes really severe damage on multiple levels. And often you just completely lose the native crayfish populations. Gone.
Wow. And the paper highlights this incredible difference in numbers, doesn't it? The density.
It's striking. So you take a native species like Passifasticus fortis out in California, you might find maybe one crayfish per square meter.
Okay, 1 per square meter sounds manageable.
But then you look at the invaders. The signal crayfish, Passifasticus lanusculus over the UK, they've recorded densities of 30 individuals per square meter.
30! That's just an order of magnitude different. It's huge.
It really is. And it points to what the researchers term super invader traits. These things are basically built to take over.
Like what kind of traits?
Well, higher fecundity for starters.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Procambarus clarkii, the red swamp crayfish, one female can lay over 500 eggs.
500 eggs. Oh.
Yeah, and then they grow faster. And they're just better at handling things like pollution or habitats that aren't pristine. Much better than the native species usually are. They just thrive where others struggle.
So they're perfectly adapted for invading, basically, which I guess leads us to the first big issue, the review tackles. The failure of prevention.
Right. And you'd think prevention would be key. I mean, the standard approach in invasion biology, like what's set out in the Convention on Biological Diversity, follows a clear hierarchy.
Yeah, it's like, first, prevent them from getting in at all. If that fails, detect them early. And only then do you start thinking about containment or control.
Exactly. And obviously, if you can eradicate them early on, that's always the best and, frankly, the cheapest option. An ounce prevention is worth a pound of cure, right?
But the paper really drives home how often prevention just doesn't happen effectively. And why is that? It seems to come down to inconsistencies in rules, especially around selling them.
That's a huge part of it.
Yeah.
You've got these regulations about, say, introducing species for farming, aquaculture, but they often don't line up with the rules for the pet trade, the aquarium hobbyists.
Or, crucially, selling them live for food.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's a massive loophole. The paper points out it's surprisingly easy to buy these invasive crayfish live, sometimes online, even in places where they're officially banned invasives.
So you end up with this fundamental conflict. The moment you give an invasive species commercial value, like selling it live,
You create an incentive for people to keep it around, maybe even spread it,
Yeah.
illegally stocking ponds, or accidental escapes from places selling them. It's almost guaranteed to happen.
and the cost when prevention fails is just astronomical. They give that example from Scotland, right? The signal crayfish eradication effort.
Yeah, GB, 250,000 pounds every 5 months, just to get rid of one species in one area.
£250,000 every 5 months. That really hammers home why getting prevention right is not just good for the environment, it's economically vital.
Absolutely. Yeah. But okay, so prevention often fails. Then managers have to move to the next step, which usually means mechanical control. And this is where we hit one of the really surprising findings in the review. Trapping.
Right, trapping. It seems like the most obvious thing to do, just catch them. But it's often the main method, isn't it?
It is the most common method, yeah.
Yeah.
But it's incredibly inefficient.
Yeah.
The paper mentions one study in England where it took 900 trap nights. That's a lot of effort just to reduce a signal crayfish population by less than 65%.
And only a partial reduction at that. But the really fascinating bit is who the traps catch.
Exactly. Traps are biased. They tend to catch the biggest crayfish, the dominant adult males, the smaller ones, the juveniles. They're often described as trap shy. Or maybe they're just too small to get caught properly.
Right, so you're selectively removing the big guys.
And that's where the counterintuitive part comes in.
Yeah.
This is the real aha moment in the paper, I think. What happens when you take out all those big dominant males?
Well, I suppose there's less competition for the ones left behind.
Precisely. You reduce the social pressure, the competition that those big males normally exert on the smaller, trap-shy youngsters.
Ah, so removing the big ones actually helps the little ones. You're inadvertently creating better conditions for the survivors to grow faster and survive better.
You got it. So instead of knocking the population back, you can end up with an even denser, healthier population down the line because the juveniles thrive. The trapping effort literally backfires.
That's incredible. So you're spending all this time and money and potentially making the problem worse?
And it doesn't stop there. Think about how it affects their spread. There was that study on the river windrush in the UK.
What did that show?
It showed that the areas where they were doing intensive trapping actually acted like sinks, pulling in crayfish from nearby areas. Crayfish moved much further into the removal sites, about 239 meters on average, compared to only about 187 meters in areas where no trapping was happening.
So the trapping zone becomes a vacuum, actively encouraging crayfish to move in from surrounding areas, potentially speeding up the overall invasion front.
Yeah, it can enhance the expansion into adjacent areas. It's not containing them. It might even be helping them spread locally.
Wow. Okay, so trapping is problematic. What about other physical methods, like barriers or draining ponds?
They have their limits too. Barriers can work in some specific situations, but they're hard to maintain. And drainage, well, that's pretty useless against species that burrow, like the red swamp crayfish, P. clarkii. They can just dig down into the mud and wait it out.
Can they survive out of water for long?
For extended periods, yeah. And even species not typically known for burrowing, like the signal crayfish, P. leniesculus, the paper notes, they'll burrow quite happily if the water level drops or they feel threatened.
Okay, so mechanical and physical methods are limited, to say the least. It makes sense, then, that researchers are looking into more, shall we say, high-risk or high-tech options.
Definitely. The review groups these into biological controls, chemical biocides, and then these newer autocidal methods, techniques, where the organism contributes to its own demise.
Let's start with biological controls, pathogens and predators, right?
Yep. The big one, pathogen-wise, is Aphanomyces stacey. It's actually an oomycete, like a water mold, but it causes crayfish plague.
Crayfish plague? That sounds serious. I think I've heard of that. Didn't it devastate native crayfish in Europe?
It did. It was accidentally brought over from North America around 1860, and yeah, it wiped out huge numbers of native European crayfish, which have no resistance.
So could we use it deliberately against the invasive ones? Some of them must be susceptible.
Some are. They mention a trial against an Australian invader, Chirax destructor, where it caused 100% mortality. But there are major hurdles.
Like what?
Well, first, many of the most problematic North American invaders, like the signal crayfish, are actually carriers and quite resistant themselves. But the biggest issue, the absolute deal breaker usually,
Is the risk to any remaining native populations.
exactly. Using the plague, even supposedly specific strains, carries this massive risk of it escaping and hitting vulnerable native populations elsewhere. The potential for collateral damage is just too high for most situations.
Okay, so plague is probably off the table. What about predators? Are there animals that eat enough crayfish to make a difference?
There are some candidates. European eels, anguilla, look promising. They can tolerate low oxygen, and crucially, they can get into crayfish burrows.
Ah, so they can target them where they hide. Any success stories?
Yes, quite a dramatic one in a Swiss lake. They introduced eels, and over 3 years, the P. clarkii population dropped by over 90%.
90%. That's huge. Is that the answer then? Just stock eels everywhere?
Well, it's not quite that simple. Eels themselves are endangered in many places, and most other fish predators have a problem. They're gape size limited.
Meaning their mouths are too small.
Basically, yeah. They can only eat the smaller crayfish. Once the invasives get large, the fish can't really predate them effectively. At best, they might just make the big crayfish hide more, change their behavior, but they don't cause the kind of mass mortality you need for control.
Right. Okay, so biological control has its challenges. What about chemicals? Biocides.
This involves using chemicals toxic to crayfish. The paper mentions things like pyblast, which is derived from pyrethrum, a natural insecticide, and Betamax VET, which contains cypermethrin.
And they work.
Oh, they're highly toxic to crustaceans, yes. There was a successful eradication of signal crayfish in Norway using Betamax VET, but they had to combine it with draining the water body first.
So quite an intensive operation.
Very. And pie blast is interesting because it breaks down quickly in sunlight and apparently doesn't harm plants.
Hmm.
But the fundamental problem with all these
Is
chemicals,
that they kill everything else too.
pretty much, they're non-selective. They'll kill native crustaceans, aquatic insects, possibly fish, depending on the chemical and concentration. Plus, they're expensive and really difficult to apply safely across large rivers or lakes. It's usually only feasible for small, contained water bodies.
Okay, that makes sense. Which leaves us with the really cutting-edge stuff, the autocidal methods. Self-destruction, you called it.
Yeah, techniques where the crayfish themselves are part of the control mechanism. The main one discussed is the sterile male release technique, or SMRT.
Sterile male release, like they use for controlling insects sometimes.
Exactly the same principle. You capture male crayfish, irradiate them to make them sterile, and then release them back into the population.
And the idea is they mate with females, but no offspring result.
Right. And the beauty of it is that it's species specific.
Right.
It only affects the target crayfish, and it doesn't pollute the environment.
Sounds brilliant on paper. How well did it work in practice?
Well, they did lab tests on P. clarkii. Using an irradiation dose of 20 gray, that's a unit of absorbed radiation energy, they managed to reduce the number of hatchlings from matings by 43%.
43% reduction. That sounds... Okay, did it work in the field?
Field trials did show some reduction in recruitment, yeah. But that 43% sterility rate is the sticking point.
Why isn't 43% enough? It seems like a decent chunk.
It's about something called the alley effect, or alley threshold. It's a concept in population biology. Basically, for many species, if their population density drops below a certain critical minimum,
They struggle to find mates or lose other benefits of group living, and the population just can't recover. It spirals downward.
exactly. To guarantee eradication using SMRT, you need to induce a high enough level of sterility to reliably push the population below that alley threshold, causing it to collapse.
And 43% just isn't enough to trigger that collapse reliably. It might suppress the population, but not wipe it out.
Right. Successful insect SMRT programs often achieve sterility rates well over 90%. That's the kind of level you probably need for crayfish too, and we're not there yet.
Okay. What about the other autocidal idea, using sex pheromones?
This involves using the chemical signals female crayfish release to attract males. The idea is to lure males into traps, using their own biology against them.
Also species-specific and environmentally friendly, I assume.
Yes, ticks those boxes. But again, there are practical problems. Purifying these pheromones is apparently quite difficult and costly. And, crucially, the tests showed that pheromone-baited traps caught significantly fewer crayfish than traps using standard food bait.
Less effective than just putting some fish scraps in a trap. That's disappointing.
It is. And there's another, perhaps more fundamental problem. If you do succeed in efficiently trapping lots of males using pheromones.
Hang on, aren't you just selectively removing the males again? Which loops us right back to the problem with regular trapping.
Fine.
You reduce competition and potentially help the juvenile survive better.
You've hit it, exactly. You risk triggering that same counterproductive effect, potentially making the population more resilient in the long run by removing the dominant males. That's a potential negative feedback loop.
So after reviewing all these methods, prevention failures, trapping backfires, risks with biocides and biological controls, limitations of SMRT and pheromones, where does that leave us? What's the paper's main takeaway?
I think the clearest message is there's no silver bullet. Non-indigenous crayfish species are too varied, they live in too many different kinds of places, for any single strategy to be a universal fix.
So what's the alternative?
Integrated pest management, or IPM. That's the likely way forward. It means using a combination of different techniques, carefully chosen and tailored to the specific location and the specific species. You have to, as the paper says, situationalize the approach.
Customize the toolkit for each invasion.
Pretty much. And they highlight a really intensive case study that shows both the potential and the limits of this. It was an IPM program against the rusty crayfish, or Connectes rusticus, in Sparkling Lake in the U.S.
What did they do there?
It was a big effort, running over 5 summers from 2001 to 2005. They combined really intensive trapping with fisheries management specifically. They protected the crayfish's fish predators, like smallmouth bass, by restricting fishing for them.
So hit them with trapping and boost their natural enemies. Did it work?
Well, they removed a staggering number of crayfish, over 88,000.
What?
And the result was a 95% decline in crayfish catches in the lake. So yes, integrated management clearly can achieve massive reductions and allow habitats to start recovering.
A 95% decline sounds like a huge success.
It was a success in terms of control. But here's the crucial point, the reality check. Even that massive multi-year integrated effort was not enough to completely eradicate the rusty crayfish from the lake.
Still couldn't get rid of them entirely, even with all that effort.
Nope. Which really underlines the scale of the challenge. Eradication is incredibly difficult once they're established. Control might be achievable, but wiping them out completely is often just not feasible with current methods.
So going forward, managers need to be really strategic, pick their battles, tailor their approach. But the paper also stresses public awareness, doesn't it?
Absolutely vital. You need the public to understand why NICS are a problem, to help with early detection reporting sightings, and also to build support for these management programs, which, as we've seen, can be really expensive and long-term.
So looking ahead, where should the research focus be? If there's no silver bullet now, what are we hoping for?
The paper points to a need for much more research into developing genuinely new approaches, especially building on those autocidal methods.
So back to SMRT and pheromones.
Yeah, two clear goals emerge. First, for SMRT, figuring out how to achieve much higher sterility rates, getting up from that 43% closer to the 90% plus levels that work for insects. That could be a game changer.
And the second goal.
For pheromones, it's about cracking the purification and concentration problem, making pheromone baits significantly more attractive than regular food baits so they become a genuinely powerful targeted trapping tool.
It feels like a massive challenge on multiple fronts, scientific, economic, and getting the public and policymakers aligned.
It really is.
Mm,
And underlying it all is that need to fix the regulatory side, especially around commercialization, that helps them spread in the first place.
definitely. So perhaps a final thought for you to consider, building on that commercialization point. Think about how easily invasive crayfish spread because they're sold live for food or pets. What other common invasive species, plants, animals, fish, might we be inadvertently helping because they have commercial value? Are we
Mhm.
supporting the very populations we're also spending millions trying to fight? Something to think about next time you see an exotic pet for sale, or maybe even certain types of food.